Donald J. Trump was sworn in as President of the United States on November 8, 2016, and with his entry into office, the political landscape has changed exponentially. Simply put, there has never been a president like Trump before. He can be both brave and at times absolutely reckless. Sometimes he's silly, sometimes funny, sometimes bafflingly thick-headed and misguided. As a result, critics and political opponents alike have been calling for him to resign his post as America's most powerful man by any means necessary, including a proposed Trump impeachment. The ball has already begun rolling in that direction. On September 24, 2019, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi initiated an impeachment inquiry against Donald Trump, the 45th and current President of the United States. It all started after a whistleblower report alleged that President Donald Trump and top administration officials had pressured the leaders of foreign nations, most notably the Ukraine, abusing the power of the presidency to advance Trump's personal interests. These allegations are extremely serious and have been corroborated by testimonies so far by Trump-appointed White House administration official Fiona Hill, at least 6 other White House officials, and other witnesses. Additional allegations of misconduct came forth in the days afterwards. Said whistleblower's report was largely based upon information given to them by more than half a dozen United States officials and has been largely verified. The report also implicated Trump's personal attorney Rudy Giuliani and U.S. Attorney General William Barr as part of a more widespread pressure campaign directed against the Ukrainian government. The first whistleblower's complaint was given to Congress on September 25, 2019, and released to the public the following day. A second whistleblower came forward on October 5th, claiming that they had first-hand knowledge of allegations associated with the call between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. From May to August 2019, Trump and Giuliani repeatedly pressured the government of Ukraine to investigate his political opponent Joe Biden, a former United States vice president and candidate for the 2020 U.S. Democratic presidential nomination, along with his son Hunter. On July 18, 2019, through his chief of staff Mick Mulvaney, Trump instructed his staff to place a hold on congressionally mandated military aid to Ukraine. During a phone call a week later, Trump allegedly pressured Zelensky to launch 2 investigations, including one into the actions of the Bidens. The whistleblower also accused the White House of trying to cover up the contents of this phone call. In response, the Trump administration released a memorandum of the call, confirming that Trump had asked Zelensky to look into Biden. The whistleblower's report stated that Trump's violations were so obviously egregious that White House officials quickly attempted to cover it up. One such action was intentionally misclassifying the transcript of the call and other evidence of presidential misconduct and politically damaging material so as to place it on top-secret servers where very few people would be able to access it. Administration officials began placing transcripts of conversations with world leaders onto these servers following high-profile leaks in the year 2017. The White House officially responded to the impeachment proceedings with a letter from White House counsel Pat Cipollone to House Speaker Pelosi. Cipollone stated that it would cease all cooperation with the investigation due to a litany of concerns, including there not being a vote of the full House and that the proceedings were being conducted behind closed doors. Efforts to impeach President Donald Trump have been made by numerous people and groups. In fact, talk of impeachment began even before Trump took office. Formal efforts were initiated by Democratic Representatives Al Green and Brad Sherman in 2017, the first year of his presidency. A December 2017 resolution of impeachment failed in the then Republican-led House by a 58-364 margin. Democrats gained control of the House again following the 2018 elections and launched multiple investigations into Trump's actions and finances. On January 17, 2019, new accusations involving Trump surfaced. These accusations claimed that Trump instructed his long-term lawyer Michael Cohen to lie under oath surrounding Trump's involvement with the Russian government to erect a Trump Tower in Moscow. This also sparked calls for an investigation and for the president to resign or be impeached should such claims prove to be authentic. On April 18, 2019, the Mueller report was released, but it reached no conclusion as to whether Trump had committed criminal obstruction of justice. Special counsel Robert Mueller strongly hinted that it was up to Congress to make such a determination. Congressional support for an impeachment inquiry increased as a result. Speaker Pelosi initially opposed calls for impeachment. In May 2019, she indicated that Trump's continued actions, which she characterized as obstruction of justice and refusal to honor congressional subpoenas, might make an impeachment inquiry necessary. An increasing number of House Democrats and a then Republican Justin Amash, who had later defected, were requesting such an inquiry. Let's dig a bit deeper into the Ukrainian controversy. From May to August 2019, Trump and his personal attorney Rudy Giuliani pressured the Ukrainian government to dig into the business activities of Hunter Biden, the son of 2020 presidential candidate Joe Biden, who took a board seat on Ukrainian natural gas company Burisma Holdings. Despite the allegations, as of September 2019, there has been no evidence produced of any wrongdoing by the Bidens. The whistleblower report centered around one instance of such pressure that occurred in a July 25 phone call between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. During the call, Trump allegedly mentioned 2 investigations he wanted to see Ukraine launch. One of these would concern allegations that connected the American cybersecurity technology company CrowdStrike to Ukrainian actors supposedly interfering in the 2016 election. Trump had been repeatedly told by aides that Ukraine did not interfere in the 2016 election, but refused to accept these assurances. This theory, which originated on the English-language image board website 4chan in 2017, has been spread by blogs, social media, and Fox News. The other requested investigation concerned Joe Biden, former US president and a candidate for the 2020 presidential election, and the Ukrainian business practices of his son, Hunter Biden. At the time of the inquiry, Joe Biden was the leading candidate in Democratic Party primary polling, according to poll aggregators, making him Trump's most likely 2020 election opponent. On September 25th, the White House released part of a transcript of Trump's conversation with Zelensky, following a promise to do so the previous day. On the same day, the whistleblower complaint was released to Congress. On July 18, 2019, Trump had placed a hold on military aid to Ukraine while providing no explanation. He lifted the hold in September. Trump never mentioned the hold in his conversation with Zelensky, but he repeatedly pointed out that the United States had been very, very good to Ukraine, with Zelensky agreeing. Zelensky then showed interest in obtaining more US missiles, to which Trump replied, "I would like you to do us a favor though," and brought up his request for the aforementioned investigations. Democratic candidate for president Elizabeth Warren described this sentence as a smoking gun, suggesting a quid pro quo. Prominent Democrats, including Senators Robert Mendez and Chris Murphy, suggested that the hold may have been intended to implicitly or explicitly pressure the Ukrainian government to investigate the business actions of Hunter Biden. Former Ukrainian presidential advisor Serhiy Lashenko said it was made a clear fact that Ukraine's communication with the United States was dependent on discussing a future investigation into the Bidens, while another anonymous Ukrainian lawmaker stated that Trump attempted to pressure and blackmail them into accepting a quid pro quo agreement based upon cooperation. The New York Times reported that on October 3rd, the US Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, and US Special Envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volkerm, drafted a statement back in August for Zelensky to sign that would commit the Ukraine to investigating Burisma, the company that Hunter Biden worked for, as well as the conspiracy theory that Ukraine interfered with the 2016 election to benefit Hillary Clinton. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff stated on September 13, 2019, that he had issued a subpoena to Acting Director of National Intelligence Joseph Maguire, as Maguire had failed to release a whistleblower's complaint filed under the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act on August 12, 2019, to the Congressional Intelligence Committees as was arguably required by the relevant statute. Schiff maintained that he had concerns that the complaint might have been withheld from Congress in an unlawful effort to protect the president and conceal from the committee information related to his possible serious or flagrant misconduct, abuse of power, or violation of law. On September the 22nd, shortly after the whistleblower's allegations became public, Trump acknowledged that he had discussed Joe Biden during a July 25th call with Zelensky. Trump stated that the conversation I had was largely congratulatory, was largely corruption. All of the corruption taking place was largely the fact that we don't want our people like Vice President Biden and his son adding to the corruption already in Ukraine. Trump completely denied that his hold on military aid for Ukraine was linked to the Ukrainian government's refusal to investigate the Hunter Biden controversy, while also saying that withholding aid for this reason would have been ethically acceptable if he had done it. On September 26, 2019, Trump accused the whistleblower of being a spy and guilty of treason, and that treason is punishable by death. As a result of Trump's comments, the whistleblower's lawyers said their client feared for his or her safety. Two people close to Trump told the New York Times that the behavior in the scandal was typical of his dealings on the phone with world leaders. Engage in flattery, discuss mutual cooperation, and bring up some form of a personal favor that could then be delegated to another person on Mr. Trump's team. In an interview, Giuliani defended Trump, calling the president's request of the Ukrainian president perfectly appropriate, while also noting that he himself may have made a similar request to Ukrainian officials. A second whistleblower, who is also an intelligence official, came forward on October 5, 2019, with first-hand knowledge of allegations associated with the phone call between Trump and Zelensky, according to the lawyer who is representing both whistleblowers. Details came forward on September 27, 2019, that the White House had used the most highly classified computer system to store memorandums of conversations with the leaders and officials of countries including Ukraine, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. Administration officials had begun storing these transcripts into this system after Trump's conversation with Australia's Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto leaked earlier in 2017. This was seen by critics and the media as a deliberate attempt to hide information that could be considered to be potentially damaging. Also, on September 27th, a report surfaced that Trump had told Russian officials in 2017 that he was unconcerned about Russian interference in US elections. On October 4, 2019, Trump held a news conference where he publicly stated that the Ukraine should investigate the Bidens, and then he called upon China to investigate the Bidens as well. Soon after the release of the Mueller report, Trump began urging an investigation into the origins of the Russia probe, wanting to investigate the investigators and possibly discredit the conclusions of the FBI and Mueller. In April 2019, Attorney General William Barr announced that he had launched a review of the origins of the FBI's investigation, even though the origins of the probe were already being investigated by the Justice Department's Inspector General and by U.S. Attorney John Huber, who had been appointed to the same task in 2018 by then Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Barr assigned U.S. Attorney John Durham to lead the probe, and Trump directed the American intelligence community to promptly provide assistance and information to Barr, and assigned to him the full and complete authority to declassify any related documents. Although Durham was nominally in charge of the investigation, Barr himself began contacting foreign governments to ask for information about the origins of the FBI probe. Barr personally visited the United Kingdom and Italy to seek information. Italy's parliament is expected to begin its own investigation into Barr's meetings with Italian secret services. Upon Barr's request, Trump himself phoned the Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, to ask for assistance in this matter. Things then took an interesting turn for Trump's lawyer. Igor Fruman and Lev Parnas, two Florida businessmen and associates of Giuliani, were arrested on October 9, 2019, on campaign finance-related charges brought by federal prosecutors in New York City. The men had hired Giuliani as a consultant in their security company and also assisted him in his search in Ukraine for damaging information about Trump's political opponents. Both Fruman and Parnas were in possession of one-way tickets out of the United States upon their arrest. A majority of House members support the initiation of the impeachment inquiry. As of October 10, 2019, this includes 227 Democrats and one independent, Representative Justin Amash from Michigan, who left the Republican Party on July 4, 2019, in the wake of his protests regarding the lack of holding Trump accountable. Amash became a top and vocal supporter of impeachment after the whistleblower report was released, stating that the call script was a devastating indictment of the president. After further allegations of misconduct came to light in late September, Nevada Representative Mark Amadei was reportedly the first Republican in the House of Representatives to support an impeachment inquiry, but later clarified that he supported an oversight process, but did not support an inquiry, without explaining the distinction between the two. On September 27, 2019, a subpoena was issued by the House to obtain documents that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had originally refused to release. These documents were said to include several interactions between Trump, Giuliani, and Ukrainian government officials. The documents are requested to be filed with the involved committees probing the issue. The failure to do so shall constitute evidence of obstruction of the House's impeachment inquiry, as stated in a letter written to Pompeo. The subpoena came after several requests by the House to receive the documents from the Secretary, which he did not fulfill. Several members of the House involved with the impeachment inquiry sent him subsequent letters stating that they will be meeting with members of the State Department who may provide further information. The very next week, a subpoena was also issued to Giuliani for production of documents. In a private conference call with Democratic lawmakers on September 29, 2019, Nancy Pelosi explained how 3 of these House committees will be investigating the president's supposed abuse of power. The Intelligence Committee would focus on the contents of the whistleblower complaint and whether the complaint may have been wrongfully hidden from Congress, while the Foreign Affairs Committee would focus on interactions the State Department may have had with the president's personal attorney Giuliani, and the Oversight and Reform Committee will investigate whether White House classification systems were used to secure possibly damaging records of phone calls between the US president and leaders of various countries around the world. On October 4, 2019, the House Intelligence Committee issued subpoenas both to the White House and to Vice President Mike Pence for documents pertaining to the whistleblower complaint. Among the White House documents requested include audio tapes, transcripts, notes, and other White House documents related to the whistleblower controversy. On October 8, 2019, the White House announced that it would cease all cooperation with the investigation in a letter from White House counsel Pat Cipollone to Speaker Pelosi. In the letter, Cipollone stated that the investigation violates the Constitution, the rule of law, and every past precedent, and that the President cannot allow your constitutionally illegitimate proceedings to distract him and those in the executive branch. The letter went on to state that the investigation's unprecedented actions have left the president with no choice. In order to fulfill his duties to the American people, the Constitution, the executive branch, and all future occupants of the office of the presidency, President Trump and his administration cannot participate in your partisan and unconstitutional inquiry under these circumstances. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi responded to the letter, stating that the White House should be warned that continued efforts to hide the truth of the president's abuse of power from the American people will be regarded as further evidence of obstruction. Giuliani's attorney, Jim A. Sale, sent a letter to the House Intelligence Committee on October 15, 2019, stating that Giuliani will not hand over documents subpoenaed by the committee. Citing attorney-client and executive privilege, the letter characterized the subpoena as beyond the scope of legitimate inquiry. Acting Director of National Intelligence Joseph Maguire delayed the whistleblower complaint from reaching Congress, testified before the House Intelligence Committee on September 26, 2019. Maguire defended his decision not to immediately forward the whistleblower complaint to Congress and explained that he had consulted the White House counsel and the Office of Legal Counsel at the Justice Department, but was unable to determine if the document was protected by executive privilege. Democrats on the committee questioned Maguire's actions, contending that the law demands that he shall forward all such complaints to the committee. Maguire responded that the situation was unique since the complaint involved the communications of the President of the United States. Members of the Intelligence Committee also asked the director why he chose to consult with White House lawyers, which he was not required to do so by law, to which he responded that he believed it would be prudent to have another opinion. On the morning of the Cipollone letter, Ambassador Sondland had been scheduled to testify before the House regarding his involvement in the withholding of aid from the Ukraine. However, he was instructed not to attend at the last minute by the State Department, who were acting upon Trump's command. Marie Yovanovitch, the former ambassador to Ukraine, testified on October 11th in defiance to the White House, although she remained an employee of the U.S. State Department. Yovanovitch told House committees that she was incredulous at being dismissed in May. Yovanovitch described the State Department as attacked and hollowed out from within. She went on to testify that she had never met or spoken with Hunter Biden and that Joe Biden had never raised the subject of his son or the Ukrainian gas firm that employed him. During his July 25th phone call with Zelensky, Trump called Yovanovitch bad news and mentioned that she's going to go through some things. A former advisor to the president on Russian affairs, Fiona Hill, testified before congressional investigators on October 14, 2019. Hill told the House committees that Giuliani sidestepped State Department officials and diplomats, and that she had confronted Ambassador Sondland, who was assisting Giuliani in his efforts to pressure Ukraine into beginning investigations that would personally benefit Trump. Upon instruction from John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor, Hill expressed her and Bolton's concerns about Giuliani's activities to John Eisenberg, an attorney for the National Security Council, after a meeting in which Sondland announced that there were Ukrainian investigations that were dropped that needed to be started up again. Hill testified that she, Bolton, Volker, Energy Secretary Rick Perry, and 2 Ukrainian officials were there for that meeting on July 10, 2019, and that Bolton was furious after the meeting when he told her that he was not part of whatever drug deal Sondland and Mulvaney are cooking up. Hill told the committees that Giuliani was running a rogue foreign policy while informing the president's official advisors but leaving them powerless to stop it. When she contested Sondland, who she believed was involved in affairs outside his position's purview, he claimed that, according to Trump, he was in charge of Ukraine matters. Deputy Assistant Secretary for European and Eurasian Affairs George P. Kent appeared before the House Intelligence, Foreign Affairs and Oversight Committees on October 14, 2019. Kent is the second current State Department official to defy White House instructions and comply with House subpoenas to testify before the committees. According to Virginia Democratic Representative Jerry Connolly, Kent testified that during a meeting at the White House on May 23, organized by Mulvaney, Sondland, Volker, and Perry, who called themselves the Three Amigos, had stated that they were now responsible for Ukrainian affairs. Connolly also said that Kent testified that he was directed to lay low and to focus on foreign relations with the 5 other countries in his purview. In the wake of the inquiry, the White House threatened to shut down all major legislation as political leverage. Trump said there would be no more infrastructure bills, no more anything. Despite this declaration, legislators continued to work, with an emphasis on spending bills. Following the initiation of the impeachment inquiry, Trump and his surrogates engaged in a campaign to discredit impeachment. Giuliani took a lead role in making television appearances. One aspect of the campaign focused on attacking Joe Biden and his son over alleged but unproven misconduct involving Ukraine. Another aspect of the campaign focused on discrediting the whistleblower over his motivations and for making the complaint on what was described as hearsay. Trump took to his platform of choice, Twitter, to attack opponents and praising supporters. On September 30, 2019, he suggested that one of the investigators, Representative Schiff, chairman of the Intelligence Committee, could be arrested for treason, and that a second American Civil War would occur if he was removed from office. In further tweets, Trump said that he wanted to meet the whistleblower who had betrayed him in a totally inaccurate and fraudulent way. He said the individual illegally gave the information and potentially spied on the United States, and hinted they would face major consequences. Trump went on to falsely describe the impeachment inquiry as a coup, intending to take away the power of the people, their vote, and their freedoms, and said the Democrats were wasting everyone's time and energy on bullshit. During a private event on September the 26th, which was recorded and later reported by the Los Angeles Times, Trump allegedly told supporters that the individual's actions were close to a spy. And, you know what we used to do in the old days when we were smart, right? The spies and treason. We used to handle it a little differently than we do now. This was an apparent reference to execution. On September the 30th, Trump said, "We're trying to find out who the whistleblower was." Social media again would take center stage in the Trump saga as he unhatched a new plan to protect himself from impeachment. On September the 30th, CNN, citing research by Laura Edelson at New York University's Tandon School of Engineering, reported that Trump and his re-election campaign had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on Facebook advertisements to push for his defense. More than 1,800 ads on Trump's Facebook page that mentioned impeachment had run the week prior and had been viewed between 16 to 18 million times on Facebook. Analysis by the New York University Tandon School of Engineering indicates that the campaign spent between $600,000 and $2 million on the ads, which reportedly attempted to rally and enlist people for the official impeachment defense task force. A further $700,000 is believed to have been spent for ads on Pence's Facebook page, which mirrored the content on Trump's. On October the 3rd, with the impeachment inquiry ongoing, Trump told reporters that in addition to Ukraine, China should also investigate the Bidens. Later in the day, Pence voiced his support for Trump's comments, saying, "I think the American people have a right to know if the Vice President of the United States or his family profited from his position." After Pence was requested to turn over related documents on October the 4th, his press secretary, Katie Waldman, criticized the request as a ploy. Andrew P. Buckeye is the lead attorney representing the whistleblowers. Mark Zaid, co-counsel for the whistleblower, said in a statement in September 2019 that his client's identity must be protected by law, and cited testimony by McGuire which drew upon the Whistleblower Protection Act. This statement was released after Trump questioned the validity of the whistleblower's statements on the social media platform Twitter. Another lawyer for the whistleblower took to Twitter to issue a warning on September the 30th that said whistleblower is entitled to anonymity, is protected by laws and policies, and is not to be retaliated against. To do so would violate federal law. Buckeye sent a joint letter to McGuire on September the 28th and made public on September the 29th, in which they raised concerns about the language used by Trump, among other things. In the letter, the lawyers state, "The events of the past week have heightened our concerns that our client's identity will be disclosed publicly, and that as a result, our client will be put in harm's way." The letter also mentioned the $50,000 bounty that two conservative Trump supporters have offered as a reward for information about the whistleblower. Trump's Republican allies are opposed to his impeachment. Senator Lindsey Graham criticized the whistleblower, referring to his complaint as hearsay and an outright sham. Many Republicans who had been stout defenders of congressional oversight during the Obama administration joined Trump's resistance to the investigation. A notable Republican critic of Trump is Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, who called Trump's actions troubling in the extreme and wrong and appalling. Romney said it strained credulity to say that Trump's actions were anything other than politically motivated. Governor of Vermont Phil Scott became the first Republican governor to support the impeachment inquiry. Charlie Baker, the Republican governor of Massachusetts, also announced his support. Republican Maryland Governor Larry Hogan later announced his support for an inquiry, though clarifying he did not yet support impeachment itself. The New York Times editorial board stated that Trump appeared to be operating on the assumption that the more shameless his assault on democratic norms and laws, the more he can get away with it. News outlet The Guardian released an editorial calling Trump an abuser of his office. In response to the October 8th letter from the White House to Pelosi, an editorial in the New York Times said the letter argued that it was right for the President of the United States to use his office to seek a foreign government's interference on his behalf in an election, even by way of extortion. Concurrently, the letter argued that it is illegitimate for Congress, a co-equal branch of government, to undertake any investigation into the president or members of his administration, or even his associates regarding this behavior. The editorial additionally called the letter a formal assertion of executive power and impunity without precedent in American history, noting that neither the Constitution nor federal law prescribed the process for impeachment and that therefore it was for the House to decide how to carry out the investigation. The Washington Post editorial board called the letter unhinged and stated that Trump was asserting autocratic authority. A group of 17 former Watergate special prosecutors published an opinion piece in the Washington Post in unanimous agreement that the public record contained prima facie evidence that Trump had committed impeachable acts. Historians and diplomats called the severity of the allegations unprecedented in American history. Some academics responded to tweets by Trump in which he quoted a longtime evangelical pastor who warned of a civil war if Democrats continued the inquiry. On Twitter, John Coates, a Harvard Law School professor, cautioned that the tweet was an independent basis for impeachment, as the sitting president was threatening civil war if Congress exercised its constitutionally authorized power. A fellow faculty member of Harvard Law, Lawrence Tribe, agreed, but cautioned that, due to the typical tone of Trump's tweets, the statement could be interpreted as typical Trumpian bloviating that would not be taken seriously or literally. Academic historian Kevin Kruse took issue with Trump's assertion that the Democrats would be solely responsible if he were removed from his office through the impeachment process. Kruse said that for the U.S. Senate to remove Trump from office, 20 Republicans would need to join the 45 Democrats and 2 independents, and blaming only the Democrats was both dangerous and dumb. Given all the statistical ties, polling has indicated that Americans are generally split on their support of the impeachment inquiry. A YouGov poll on September 24, 2019 found that 55% would support the impeachment, and 26% would oppose if Trump was confirmed to have pressured the Ukrainian government. A Marist poll for NPR and PBS around the same timeframe found that a 50 to 46 plurality approved of the House's decision to start an impeachment inquiry. A Politico Morning Consult poll, released shortly after Pelosi announced her support for the inquiry, found support for impeachment increased 7 percentage points compared to the poll of the previous week. A Business Insider poll on September 27th found that 45% supported an impeachment inquiry while 30% opposed. A September 30th Quinnipiac University poll found that 56% of those polled thought members of Congress who support impeaching President Trump are doing so more on the basis of partisan politics than on the basis of the facts. Despite all of the controversy surrounding Trump and the questioning of his ethics, his camp is laser-focused on his re-election in 2020. In fact, they've already been at it for quite some time. Donald Trump, who officially took office on January 20, 2017, began his re-election campaign unusually early for an incumbent president. He began spending for his re-election effort within weeks of his election and officially filed his campaign with the Federal Election Commission on the day of his inauguration. Since February of 2017, Trump has held numerous rallies and a fundraiser for this campaign. He has visited key electoral states. Thus far, the campaign has raised funds and run 2 nationwide advertising campaigns. Trump has confirmed in several speeches that the slogans for the 2020 race will be "Keep America Great" and "Promises Made, Promises Kept." On November 7, 2018, Trump confirmed that Mike Pence would again be his vice presidential running mate in 2020. On June 18, 2019, Trump held an official campaign launch event at the Amway Center in Orlando, Florida. Trump's predecessors merged their campaign committees into their party's committee following their election victories. Following his 2016 election victory, Trump eschewed this presidential tradition and retained a separate campaign committee which continued raising funds. In December 2016, the campaign raised $11 million. These moves indicated that Trump was already eyeing a 2020 run. Trump started spending money on the 2020 race on November 24, 2016, just 16 days after the end of the 2016 election. The earliest campaign disbursement that his committees reported was spent towards the 2020 presidential primaries was for the purchase of a Delta Airlines ticket on this date. Trump officially filed his re-election campaign with the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, on January 20, 2017, the day of his inauguration. Trump launched his re-election campaign earlier in his presidency than his predecessors did. Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, and Ronald Reagan all declared their candidacies for re-election in the third year of their presidencies. Trump filed the papers for his re-election campaign approximately 47 months prior to the date of the election. In contrast, both Reagan and George H.W. Bush filed approximately 12 months. George W. Bush filed approximately 18, and both Clinton and Obama filed approximately 19 months prior to the date of the election. While previous presidents had held rallies in the early days of their presidency to garner support for legislation, such rallies differed from those held by Trump in that they were funded by the White House rather than by campaign committees. One of the advantages of having his campaign committee fund the events is that organizers can more discriminately screen attendees, refusing entry to non-supporters. Trump's February rally in Melbourne, Florida, was the earliest campaign rally for an incumbent president. By filing for his campaign as early as he did, Trump also gave himself a head start on fundraising. This can theoretically help discourage primary challengers. Trump will be 74 years old by Election Day 2020. This would make Trump the oldest ever presidential nominee on a major party ticket, surpassing Ronald Reagan and Bob Dole, both of whom were age 73 when they were the Republican Party nominees in 1984 and 1996 respectively. Since his three predecessors, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama, won re-election, if Trump is re-elected, it would be the first time in American history that there have been 4 consecutive presidents who were elected to 2 terms. If Trump completed his second term on January 20, 2025, he would be 78 years old and would have become the oldest person to serve as president, surpassing Ronald Reagan, who was 77 when he left office in 1989. Although Trump's early campaign filing is extraordinarily unusual, aspects of a permanent campaign are not entirely unprecedented in American politics. Such a phenomenon had a presence in the White House at least as early as the presidency of Bill Clinton. Under the advice of Sidney Blumenthal, Clinton's staff continued to engage in campaign methodology once in office, using polling for assistance in making decisions. Political observers who bolster the opinion that a permanent campaign has had a major impact on recent presidencies argue that decisions by presidents have increasingly been made with considerations to their impact on voter approval. The concept of a permanent campaign also describes the focus which recent presidents have given to electoral concerns during their tenures in office, with a distinction between the time they have spent governing and the time they have spent campaigning having become blurred. Political observers consider the rise in presidential fundraising as a symptom of the permanent campaign. The disproportionately large amounts of time that presidents have spent visiting key electoral states has been pointed to as evidence of ulterior electoral motives influencing presidential governance, emblematic of the blurred lines between campaigning and governance in the White House. For instance, George W. Bush embarked on 416 domestic trips during his first 3 years in office. This was 114 more than his predecessor Bill Clinton made in his first 3 years. In his first year, 36% of Bush's domestic trips were to the 16 states that were considered swing states after having been decided the closest margins during the 2000 election. In his second year, 45% of his domestic travel was to these states, and his third year, 39% of his domestic travel was to these states. One way or the other, the American people continue to voice their opinions of Trump, with few finding themselves on a sort of middle ground. People either love Trump or hate him. Presidential approval ratings have shown Trump to be among the least popular presidents in the history of modern opinion polling as of his third year in office. Opinion polls have generally shown low support for Trump when compared to several Democratic candidates, including Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Elizabeth Warren, when tested in hypothetical election matchups. Observers point out that presidential job approval is highly partisan, writing, "Trump's job approval ratings continue to be marked by extreme partisan polarization, with 91% of Republicans and 5% of Democrats approving of the job he is doing." 38% of independents evaluate Trump's performance positively. The 86-point gap in Republican and Democratic ratings of the president ties the highest Gallup has measured in a single survey. 86 points also separated Democratic and Republican ratings of President Barack Obama at the time of the 2012 presidential election. Gallup polling data shows that job approval for Donald Trump is approximately 87% among Republicans versus only 8% among Democrats. The reverse was the case for Barack Obama. Only time will indicate how this all pans out in the end. But one thing that cannot be denied is that all of these proceedings, for better or for worse, are historic in every way. There has never been a president like Donald J. Trump, and it will be truly curious to see how history remembers him, second term or not.